Welcome back to the Seaboard Central, everyone, in part 8 in the Realistic Ops series. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how I determine how many cars I'm actually going to need to operate the layout. And I'll show you how I came up with how many cars are needed for each industry. So if you find that interesting, keep watching. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, appreciate a thumbs up. So without further ado, let's get started. So my ADM facility is one of the largest industries on the layout, and it goes through about 12 cars per operating session. So it's one of the industries we're going to look at today to determine how many cars are actually going to be needed when it comes to this particular industry. Another industry we'll look at is National Cement, also located in Ragland, Alabama. And even though it only processes 4 cars a day, it's going to be a little bit different as far as ADM is concerned, because it supplies cars for 2 different shippers. So we'll see how I figure out how many cars are actually going to be needed here. So obviously, one of the determining factors on how many cars you're actually going to need is the size of your layout. So let's say, for example, you have a shelf style layout that just goes around the walls in one room and maybe a couple of industries. Now all you have is maybe the industries and say an interchange yard. So obviously you're not going to need as many cars as a larger layout that's more complex. And part of what makes one more complex is how many trains it requires to move the cars from their origin to destination. And this often involves large rail yards, or larger rail yards like the one I have modeled here, where a train comes in, is classified, and goes out on another train. In an earlier episode, I talked about connection performance. Connection performance deals with making sure the right car gets on the right train at the right time. For example, let's look at how these DDG cars that are coupled to the ADM plant switcher will move over the layout. So let's look again at the track plan and see how cars will move from the ADM facility. These DDG cars that are loaded out here will make it over to Southern States in Carrollton. Well, we start out with a switcher that originates in Gadsden, train L83. And L83 is actually built by train Y81, one of the yard switchers in the morning. So it'll leave, come up to Ragland and work ADM, and then come back that afternoon and yard its train. So after L83 arrives into Gadsden, it's up to the second shift yard job, Y86, to make sure the car makes it on the next train, train 480. And that's where the connection performance is really important, because if it misses train 480, it'll be a full 24 hours before it can depart out on the next train. So it catches 480. 480 takes it up the helix into Carrollton. And the block of Carrolltons will be on the head end of the train, where they'll set them off here. And then they'll pick up any cars that are destined for Macon and points east and move over the rest of the layout into staging. So at this point, the afternoon Carrollton switcher, which goes on duty here, here's the yard office, will go and sort through the inbound cars set off by train 480, and it'll spot any cars for Southern States here, including those 2 DDG cars. So the question is, how many cars is it going to be required to fulfill this move? So to help me determine how many cars I'm actually going to need, I came up with this commodity pool worksheet. So we have these to fill out. For example, the shipper or receiver. In this case, it's a shipper, and it's ADM. And the location is Ragland. In this case, the commodity is DDG. And the AAR car type is a C114, C114. It's a larger covered hopper. So the first question we need to answer is how many cars, total cars, are on hand at the origin. And that it could include either the industry, the interchange, or staging, depending on where the car originates from on your layout. In this case, it's actually going to be the industry. So let's see how many cars we actually have located at ADM in Ragland. So currently at the industry, I have 2 cars that are in the process of being loaded here. You see, coupled to the switcher. And I also have 2 empties that are hanging out. and they're ready to go in. So that's a total of 4 cars. So we'll put down 4 cars here. The next question that we need to answer is total cars on hand at the destination. And the destination could also be an industry, interchange, or staging yard, depending on your situation. And in the case if it's a small shelf layout, this may be the only thing you need to worry about. How many cars are at the industry and how many cars are at interchange or staging. And then you figured out how many cars you're going to need. But in my case, where it's a larger layout, it's going to be require a little more work. So looking at this plan, Southern States is here, and at any given time, there's going to be 2 cars there. So we'll have 2 down for cars at the destination. So the next question we need to answer is how many cars, total cars, are en route? And here I have in the yard. So at any given time in Gadsden Yard, there's going to be at least 2 DDG cars, whether they're loaded or empty, that'll be located in the yard. So we put down 2 for Gadsden Yard. Now the next question we have is how many cars are en route on trains? And here I have multiple trains that it could possibly catch, because remember we're dealing with 3 different trains. So the first being the L83 out of Raglan. There'll be 2 on that train. And the next train being L68 in Carrollton. There's 2 on that train. So to answer the question of how many cars are actually going to be needed is 12. 12 cars to make this move. Now let's look at corn, which is a whole lot more. If you'll notice, you'll see 8 cars there in the storage yard, and there's 6 cars actually in the process of being unloaded. So right there, you're looking at 14 cars of corn just on hand. Now we're talking about the receiver in this case is ADM at Raglan, commodities corn, car tops are C113s and C114s. That's an older style covered hopper. The C114s are a little larger with more capacity. So the total cars on hand at the industry, 14. So next, how many cars are on hand at the destination? And in this case, we're talking about the interchange. So let's check that out. So on the layout, these 2 tracks in the foreground here, this track and this track, represents Birmingham staging, and that's where these cars of corn will be coming through. So at any given time, there's going to be 8 cars on the interchange track. So in this case, we have 8 cars. Now what about in the yard? Well, the same thing goes. There's 8 cars in the yard. What about on train L83? 8 cars on train L83. And here you can see train L83 on that back track that runs against the backdrop. It's arrived into Raglan, and it has 8 loads of corn on the train. So when it comes to how many cars of corn is actually going to be needed to keep ADM going in Raglan, 38. Big number. So when it comes to ethanol, we can see here, there's 6 ethanol tanks currently located at ADM. How many cars are actually going to be needed for it? Let's look. So we'll see here that the shipper is ADM Ethanol at Raglan. Commodity is ethanol. Car types are T108, it's a larger tank car. Total cars on hand is 6. In this case, the total cars on hand at destination, which would actually be staging, would be 2. 2 in the yard at Gadsden and 2 on train L83, for a grand total of 12 cars needed. So as you can see where I'm going with this, that a layout my size is going to require quite a number of rail cars to keep it operating. So I started going through all the cars that I have in my collection to see if I have enough cars to satisfy my operating requirements. And here you can just see the carloads of just the corn going to ADM. All the car numbers, and I've wrote down some information that would be important when it comes to operation. Raglan, Alabama. Here's the routing, actually how long the cars are and their car types. So I've got enough cars to take care of the corn, 38 cars. Here's the 12 cars that are the DDG cars, the C114. So I got those taken care of. And here's the 12 ethanol tanks. And I show the information for the empty move and for the loaded move. And in this case, the routing is going to remain on the SC because these cars are destined to the TBT facility in Macon, Georgia on the SC. So as they get loaded out at ADM in Raglan, they're going to pull a Macon class code. So Gadsden Yard can make sure they get connected, make train 484 to Macon. The last industry we'll talk about is National Cement, and it's a different situation in the fact that there's two separate shippers that ship from this location. We have both Argos and Cemex that loads out product out of here, going to two separate locations. When it comes to Argos, it's another move where you have cars originated here from National Cement that make their way back to Gadsden Yard and end up also catching train 480 to Carrollton. And in this case, there's an Argos facility here that unloads cement. So at any given time, there'll be cars at both locations. For the Cemex move, you'll have cars that come out of here that'll go back to the Gadsden Yard and actually get interchanged to Norfolk Southern. So that's as far as they'll go. There's a Norfolk Southern job. It comes off this interchange track, and that'll work Gadsden Yard. So here's what I came up with for both of these shippers that originate out of Raglan, Argos and Cemex. And you can tell that Argos will require more cars. So the total cars on hand at industry at any given time is 4. The total cars on hand at the Argos facility in Carrollton can be 4. The cars in Gadsden Yard is 2. And cars on train L83 is 2. And then for Cemex, the total cars on hand at the industry is 2. Total cars on hand at the interchange is 2. In Gadsden Yard is 2. And on train L83 is 2, for a total of 8. So you can see this is going to require together 20 cement hoppers just for National Cement. So for many of you are thinking, wow, that is a lot of rail cars, a lot more than you probably anticipated. And it turns out that after I work the worksheets out, I actually need to purchase 2 more cement hoppers. So I hope you found this video interesting and informative. Next week, I'm going to be talking about routes and how railroads determine which locals work which industries according to their route. So I hope you'll tune back in for that. And as always, I thank you for tuning into the Seaboard Central. And until next time, happy model railroading, everyone.